Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a review of Blue and Gold by KJ Parker. Every month I've committed to reading a KJ Parker book with Alan. We sometimes swap between one of his novels or one of his novellas, and this month we decided to pick up a novella. Blue and Gold is essentially the first book in a little mini series. We follow one character called Salon Linus. Salon Linus is a philosopher, he's an inventor, an alchemist. He's one of those people that is a little bit of a jack of all trades. We follow his story. He is telling us the story retrospectively. The story kicks off with one of the best beginnings of a book that I've ever read. I'm going to read it because I think it perfectly summarizes the book, and I'm not going to give any more insight into the plot of this book because this is a story that is best consumed with as little expectation as possible. So here's the beginning. "Well, let me see," I said as the innkeeper poured me a beer. "In the morning, I discovered the secret of changing base metal into gold. In the afternoon, I murdered my wife." That's it. And then it goes into the story. With a lot of Parker's works, I would say the same thing. Go in without really knowing too much about the story because he takes the stories in so many different ways, especially with this one, that if you learn too much about the plot, it might give away certain things. And I think it's just best read with as little context as possible. That's all I'm going to say about the plot. I'm going to jump into what I liked about it. There was much that I loved about this book. And the first thing is Salon Linus himself. I've talked about Parker's character work many times on my channel. Some of the characters that he's written are some of my favorites of all time. And Salon Linus is no exception to that rule. As I mentioned earlier, he is an alchemist, he's a philosopher. He gives me Leonardo da Vinci vibes. A lot of Parker's work is very Renaissance inspired, and I definitely got that in this story. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Salon Linus is inspired by Da Vinci because he's a bit of a maverick. He's a bit weird. He's very intelligent, academically intelligent, but then he's also got street smarts to some degree. And then also on the other side of that spectrum, he also makes these really dumb mistakes that are really funny and quite comical. And it's really wonderful to read. The other thing about Salon Linus is that he is narrating the book. He's telling the story retrospectively. So we know he comes out of the story in some way. We just don't know how. He is an unreliable narrator. He even admits at the start of the book that he is a liar. And so you as a reader question a lot of what he says. It's funny because as you're going through the narrative, he will tell you events in a certain way. And then a couple of pages later, he will say, "I lied. And this is actually what happened." So you as the reader are questioning every little thing that he's claiming because he admits multiple times throughout the story that he is a liar and that he has lied about certain things that he's told you previously. And so you can't really take his word for anything. I love stories with unreliable narrators because you have to decide for yourself as the reader how much you trust the individual and whether you believe anything they say. And I really like that dynamic between the reader and the narrator. He's also quite self-deprecating. There's parts of the story where he'll go on and talk about all the amazing stuff that he's done and the fact that he's influenced a lot of politics and a lot of science and how people respect him. But then he'll just go on to completely crap on himself. I really love it when a really smart, intelligent character is self-deprecating because it's often a sign of intelligence to be self-deprecating about how much you know and how much influence you've had on a thing. One of the things that has always stuck in my mind from Socrates is he said that, and this is obviously not verbatim, he said that one of the things that I do know with utmost certainty is that I don't know everything. I love it when individuals are very clearly much more intelligent than the people around them, but they know the limits of their own intelligence, and yet people still put them on a pedestal. And I think Salon Linus represents that perfectly. Salon Linus as well, he is probably one of the funniest characters that I've read in a while. Parker does humor extremely well. A lot of his books are really dark, they're really grim, they present humanity at its worst, and he really shows that people are deeply flawed. We are motivated often by the wrong things. And one of the things that he does so well in this book is Salon Linus's humor. It goes back to the fact that he is very self-deprecating, but he also kind of mocks people around him. And it's not mocking people in a bad way. It's just funny. He just makes these little comments, these little observations. It actually reminded me a little bit of Glockter from the First Law trilogy. Just these little observations of people and why they do things and the way they do things. It's very witty, it's very dry. If you like British humour is what I would describe as being really dry, very sarcastic. I have this humour, and sometimes I will say something to someone and they won't know if I'm being sarcastic and they think I'm actually being serious. That's British humour. It's like, you're so dry, you're so sarcastic to the point where it's actually, you know, it could go either way, whether you're actually being serious or not. And Salon Linus embodies that perfectly. So the humour itself was on point for me because it is my humour. And I was laughing out loud multiple times. In the first page I was laughing. In the second page I was crying. I had tears in my eyes because it was just so funny. And I loved it. The humour in this one I actually think is probably my favourite of Parker's so far, which isn't saying much because his humour is excellent in every single one of his books that I've read. But in this one it really stood out for me because not only did I love the character of Salon Linus, but I also just loved the way that he himself is a very humorous, sarcastic, dry individual. The next thing I really liked is the themes that Parker talks about in this book. I talk about themes a lot with Parker's works because that is what he's really good at. He's really good at characters and he's really good at themes and seamlessly integrating them into the story. I think at the core of this story, it is a revenge story. You have themes of betrayal as well. And he covers it in such a subtle way. Like, it's not obviously a revenge story at the start of the book, and that's not a spoiler. It comes through as you progress throughout the book and you start to understand why some of the dynamics are set in the way that they are set. I'm not going to say any more than that on themes because it will become a spoiler, but this story is not what you expect when you first come into it. That I can guarantee. The next thing I really liked was the way that the story was told. I like stories when you know that the narrator is telling it retrospectively because you know that they have kind of come out on top, but it has to be done in a very specific way. And I like the way that Parker does it because it swaps between him recounting what happened, but then he randomly puts in his thoughts as he's telling the story. That could also be a downside for some people because the narrative is a little bit jarring. Like, he'll be recounting a specific memory and then the memory will just cut short and then he'll start talking about somebody that he met in his life. And you don't really see how those two things connect. But I really loved it because it made it feel like you were sat around a fire next to him and he was literally telling you the story. And getting his thoughts throughout and getting his reflections on other people and the way that events transpired just makes it feel more real. It makes it feel as though you and him are friends and he is telling you something. And then as he's telling you something, he's remembering other things. And it was really well done. It was really well crafted. I can totally understand that if you read this and you don't like the way that he does that, because it is a bit jarring. And when I first started reading it, I had to kind of reread parts of it. And then I realized that this is actually just a way that Parker is telling it from Salon Linus' perspective and giving you the indication that it is very much a retrospective story. But I really like the way that it was done. I think some people might find it a little bit disjointed, but if you can give yourself a couple of pages to get used to it, I think you can generally get used to it quite quickly. And I thought it was a really great way of making the story feel intimate. The next thing I really liked, and this is probably the last thing that I'm going to say because this review will probably go on very long otherwise, is that as a staple of Parker's works, you get a lot of detail into lots of different things. Specifically in this book, you get lots of detail into alchemy, the process of turning lead into gold. There is another subplot where he's essentially been tasked with creating the elixir of life, the elixir of youth. You get a lot of detail into that process of bringing together different ingredients, mixing them in different ways, and getting ultimately very different results and how different chemicals react with each other to create different outcomes. And I loved it. I loved chemistry when I was younger. I still do to this day. And so reading that in this book was just so good. And I actually forgot how much I loved chemistry. And it took me back to reading a lot of books around alchemy in the 16th and the 15th century in particular, because a lot of my favorite inventors from that period also dabbled in alchemy. And I loved it. It felt very familiar. It's made me rediscover an interest of mine that I'd completely forgotten. And Parker just, again, he has this wonderful ability of never making it feel like you're in school or like it's an academic textbook. It is a part of the story. It doesn't feel disjointed, and it's fantastic. You feel like you're learning something new, but not in an info dumpy way. I hate info dumping, and Parker, yet again, never feels like he is doing that. Don't know how he does it, but I respect that he can do it that well. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now I'm going to go on to things that people might not like about it. I mentioned one thing earlier, which is that the narrative can feel a little bit disjointed when he is telling the story, but then he kind of cuts in with his own thoughts. That might feel a bit weird for some people, so just bear that in mind. And my next piece is very common for Parker, and I will keep saying it in any Parker reviews that I do because I think it's important. And that is that he goes into a lot of detail into processes that a lot of people might not be interested in. If you're not interested in alchemy, if you're not interested in chemistry or politics, there's less politics in this one, but it's still there. If you're not interested in those things, then you will probably not like it. So bear that in mind. The last thing that I will mention, and I have mentioned this before, is that Parker does a decent job of writing female characters. In this book, we get 1 or 2 female characters, and he writes the beginning of female characters really well, but then they just kind of fade into nothing. It's like, oh, I just wish you'd spent more time fleshing out this character because she could actually be really compelling and interesting. So if you're going into Parker to read strong female characters, don't. The thing that I've realized as I've read more and more of his works is that that is just not his thing, unfortunately, because I actually think he could do it very well because, like I said, he writes the beginnings of female characters really well, but then they just kind of get lost into the ether. So bear that in mind. Parker is not for you if you want strong female characters. That is just something that I've now fully accepted, and I'm okay with that. Before I go on to my rating, I just want to read a couple of my favorite quotes. There are so many quotes from this book that I loved. I'm just going to give 3 quotes because it will give you a flavor of his writing style. None of these are spoilers, they're just kind of reflections from the character. So the first one is this. I'm Salon Linus, by the way, and I tell lies from time to time, which goes to prove the old rule, never entirely trust a man who talks about himself in the third person. So good. Second quote. Considering my situation dispassionately and in depth, I was forced to the conclusion that I'd have to be brave, resourceful, and imaginative. Depressing. I hate situations that bring out the best in me. Oh, it's just so good. Third one. Still, you can't have everything. And her body always mattered more to her than her soul, for want of a better word. I couldn't help smiling. Now that's alchemy, I thought. That gives you a flavour of his humour, of the way that he tells the story. It's so good, it's so satisfying to read. And if any of those sound interesting to you, go and read this book. You will love it because the whole book is like that. It's probably not a surprise that I gave this book a 5 stars. I think I preferred it even more than I Purple and Black, which is crazy because I loved Purple and Black and I gave that 5 stars. They're both still 5 stars, but I would put Blue and Gold slightly ahead because I just love the humour and I love Salon Linus. Salon Linus is quite a relatable character for me as well, and I think it was executed overall extremely well, and I can't wait to read the second Salon Linus novella. So there's my review. Let me know what you think down below. I feel like every Parker review is going to become quite predictable now, just like my Abercrombie reviews are, where it's like I give 5 stars and that's it and we move on. But he's that good. That good. Let me know if you picked it up because I don't know many people who've read it, and Alan is going to be reading it soon. At the time of the release of this video, he definitely will have read it. I'm excited to chat about it because I love this book. And it's also potentially another great entryway into Parker's works. I still stand by Purple and Black being the best entry point at the moment, but as I read more of the Salon Linus books, I might reconsider that. I'm going to leave it there. I hope you all enjoyed the review. Please give it a thumbs up if you did, and I will see you in the next one. Stay safe, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.